The scriptures in the Gospels and the Synoptics have Jesus first teach in Galilee, which is where his home is, and he sort of goes out in wider circles into Gentile territory. And then at one point in each of the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus turns his face to Jerusalem, and he makes his way there. And in that journey, he teaches in the temple. He has the final confrontation. He has betrayal and arrest, passion and death, and finally the resurrection in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is a key city. It's the center of the Jewish world. Jesus sort of had to go to Jerusalem. Jewish ideas and practices and theology, accepted rituals, the administration of the nation and the religion, institutional life, arts, culture, all of it, the disposition and the definition of Israel is grounded in the city of Jerusalem. That's where all the money and the power and influence were, baby. So he had to go right there and take it to him. Jesus going to Jerusalem is like Mr. Smith going to Washington for all of you that are over 50 years old. And Jesus' message, don't be fooled, challenged those in Jerusalem. The content of his message held them accountable. How Jews interacted with non-Jews challenged everything they believed in. He essentially said the laws of purity that separated people were no longer valid. The traditions of the elders he challenged and said, don't follow them. He called them hypocrites. He said the structure of the temple and the leadership and their culpability with the Roman Empire, the way they challenged all of that. And so he had to go there and stick it right to the people that were in charge. But I need to tell you that Jesus was also Jewish. He was Jewish himself. We, sitting here 2,000 years later, just like to think that Jewish was a nice little Christian kid. He wasn't. He was Jewish. He loved the Jewish people. His mom and dad were Jewish. He loved the way they ate. He loved their laws. He loved their customs and traditions. He had a Jewish mindset. And when Jesus came to preach his message, he came to save the Jews. Now today's text makes that very clear. It says Jesus desired to gather his people, the Jewish people, together. How often the text says that he tried to gather them together, like a mother hen sitting over her brood. Jesus wants to protect them and take care of them. And so Jesus, in this text, when it talks about the house in Jerusalem, it talks about the temple, but more important than that, it talks about the whole city of Jerusalem, and most scholars think that they're talking about the entire nation of Israel. Jerusalem represents his people, and God, the God whose journeys with Jerusalem for 1,500 years, lovingly keeps trying to reach out to them. And the text says the people were not willing. The Jews were not willing to get together, were not willing to listen to God, or listen to Jesus. The Jews and the Romans and the Gentiles each thought of themselves first. Each group thought that they were right in their own beliefs. Each group thought that they were better than the other group. And the general people supported the status quo, even though it sometimes kept them down. Those in power with money manipulated the masses with violence, with bribes, with the rule of law, and to keep order, to keep the people down. The Jewish leaders did not want to rock the boat of the delicate balance they had with the Roman Empire. They didn't want to support a man that was going to change absolutely everything and put into question their prestige, position, and money. And so the people were not willing. And because the people were not willing, because the Jewish leadership decided this, they accused Jesus of all sorts of different things. They accused him of blasphemy. They accused him of breaking the law. They accused him of hanging out with sinners, with prostitutes and tax collectors and people that drank. They accused him of being in cahoots with the devil, with Satan. And they accused him of being angry. And because of all this thing, because they saw him as a threat, they made plans. And it says it very clearly in the Gospels, they made plans to put him to death. And Herod's no different. Herod is not a nice guy in Scripture. If anybody's a student of history, Herod was a terrible guy. The whole family was awful. They killed family members if they challenged their authority, if they were possibly able to grow up and take their place. They just mowed them down and killed them. This is a guy that just killed John the Baptist because John the Baptist was saying that his marriage was so bad. And so he just had him killed. That's what despotic, malevolent tyrants do. And Herod was no different. And in this text, he says, I just killed John the Baptist. I'd really like to talk to Jesus now too. That doesn't look well for Jesus. People in power and authority don't like it when people come to share the power and when they have messages that are different from their own. And so Jesus comes to Jerusalem later on, and he knows that he's at death's door. He knows that he's condemned to die. And throughout it all, it's interesting to note what Jesus does. How does he respond to the hostility of the Jewish leadership and to the Romans as they're threatening his life? Now, Jesus, he tries to do everything he can to save his people. So, I'll just mention a bunch of things he does. He teaches all the time. He welcomes Nicodemus into his house. He goes into homes of the Jewish leaders, and he talks to them theologically about how he disagrees with them. He goes to the temple in every town he goes to and into the synagogues. Along the road, he's talking to the Jewish leaders. At meals, he's always trying to get them to see their understanding, his understanding of God and God's presence, and bring them back to God's ways. He raises from the dead a Jewish leader's little girl. He affirms the law and the prophets. He said, I live for the law and the prophets. He's just trying to show them that they've gotten off course in how they understand the law to be interpreted. And after he heals, he sends people back to the temple for purification. So he is embedded and supporting them who he is. He's not dead set against them. And he cajoles, and he gets angry, and he threatens, and he's dramatic. He tries everything, every aspect of his personality to try to get the people back to God. Now, I do the same thing. I have to tell you. Sometimes I'm angry with some of you guys. And sometimes I joke with some of you guys. And sometimes I push and poke and prod some of you guys. Sometimes I'm humorous and pray with some of you guys. I'll do anything I can to try to get you to have God in your life and to have a deeper and more joyous relationship with Jesus. That's what I do. And it's different with Linus than it is with Paula. It's totally different. They're different people. And Jesus did the same thing, anything that he could do to get the people to follow God. But they were not willing. What is it about the human heart that resists following God and loving our neighbors and standing up for justice with kindness, forgiveness, and love? And at the last, Jesus comes into Jerusalem, the capital, the central hub of the Jewish power and identity, the place where Rome and Jews come together politically, the body that willingly goes against God, the heart of darkness that has been trying to sabotage everything that Jesus does, the place that decided that he must die like all the other prophets who came to do the same thing. Jesus comes into town, and what do you think he does? He must have been furious. He must have been angry. And you know what he does? He weeps over Jerusalem. He says in the 18th chapter, when he comes into the city, he said, if only you had recognized God's presence and the things that make for peace. He's weeping outside of the city because he knows that the decisions that they have made are not leading to life and love. Even Herod, who is threatening him throughout this gospel, Jesus isn't scared of. He says, yeah, you do whatever you want. I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'll come back, but, I've got stuff to do before I get to your place and before you can kill me. Jesus, with every right to be angry and upset and revolt, and use his power to upend and destroy his enemies, simply cries and weeps over his people. He walks into their corrupt system knowing that he will die. A few weeks ago, I preached a sermon on loving your enemies. And it seems so easy when Jesus says to love your enemies. It's so easy for me to say, well, go love your enemies. That's a nice thing to say. But it's a hard commandment to do. We still don't do it. I could preach it every Sunday and we still wouldn't do it. Our country, our families, our world is divided. And text tells us today that Jesus showed us a way forward. And he models the hardest message that he gives us to do in today's text. Because I always say, love your enemies. But I don't say that Jesus actually loved his enemies. As he's going into Jerusalem, and he should be angry and upset, he could strike them all dead in the wave of a hand, but instead he's crying over them and loving them. He fulfills his own law to love his enemies. That's exactly what he's doing when he comes in, even unto the point of death. Now, I just preached that 3 weeks ago. Who remembers? See? So you might say, why in the heck are you preaching that again, Mark? We just heard that message about loving your enemies. I'm preaching it again because I am so dumbstruck and angry and sad and deeply grieved about the 49 people who were killed by Benton Harrison Tarrant in New Zealand. The white supremacists who followed in the footsteps of Andres Breivik from Norway, who killed 77 people in Oslo, who quoted Dylan Roof, who murdered 9 African-American folks in the midst of a Bible study in their church. Can you imagine being over in Marvin Lounge on a Wednesday night and having somebody come in and kill us all? I sometimes don't know what to say. And he quotes, I don't know if you've read his manifesto, it's long. And I look for his, usually folks draw upon the Christian faith to support the things that they're doing. And he quotes a great pope. Anybody know Pope Urban II, who he quoted? Did you read it? Did anybody read it? He quotes Pope Urban II. Anybody want to guess when he was the Pope? 1088. He was the Pope that preached one of the most powerful messages in the Middle Ages and started the Crusades. He preached a sermon calling European Christians to kill Muslims in order to claim the Holy Land, and his cry was, Deus vult! God wills it! Every minister of every tradition, of anybody I've ever spoken to, has seen that as one of the most shameful times in our history, when we've dedicated our entire institution for killing somebody. Outside the denominations, anybody I know. It's sort of common practice to think. And that's a guy that this guy is quoting. A vast majority of us see those as very dark days in the church. Brenton ruthlessly killed 49 people in a manifesto, and you know what his purpose was? To divide us. He wanted to say this in his manifesto. He says, I want to balkanize the United States so they're pitted against each other, and they're full of hatred and wrath, so that there's chaos in amongst us. The imam from Boston stated that it's not coincidental that these white supremacist attacks are against Muslims and Jewish and Christian places of worship. All of them have been zeroed in by that because the imam says, because it's demonic. The song that we sang that is so depressing and ominous after that beautiful upbeat anthem that they sing. I know Rick is saying, oh my God, that's so oppressive, but it says, once to every person and every nation comes a moment that we need to decide. We need to stand up. We need to believe in what Jesus says and break this cycle that keeps violence going and keeps families divided and keep our country divided. And Christians have the one tool to lead the way. It's the hardest way, and it's loving our brothers and sisters. It's loving everybody we can. Now, we live in Vermont, right? And so we often don't have a chance probably to change the entire structure of Washington. I doubt it. Our senators are powerful, but probably not that powerful, even though all of us are rooting for peace and justice around this world. But you all know me. I want to do something proactive. I want there to be something that we can do. You know me. That's what I want to do, right? So I'm beating my head. And so I'm going to propose. I haven't talked to the deacons yet, but I'm going to propose it. I'm the minister. I can do this, right? And so I'm going to propose that we ask the imam and a rabbi to come and preach once a year, regularly. Just every year, come and preach. Right in here. They've come before, but it's like, I see them around. Like, oh yeah, hi Amy, hi Imam. And then I don't see them for a year. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. How's the church? Oh yeah, family's good. Oh yeah. But there's not an ongoing relationship. And so besides the preaching, I want us to create a program, a little visitation program, where some of us, and I'm going to give up a Friday every month to do this, and I don't like giving up Friday nights, because I like to be with my family on Friday nights. But I'm going to give up a Friday night once a month, and I think we should have a handful of people go to the synagogue and go to the Islamic Society, because there's nothing like actually being there and witnessing like, we're with you. How can you say you're with you if you never go? And so I want a group of us once a month, the same time every month, just to go and be a witness there and say, I'm here on behalf of the church because I'm trying to break down barriers of fear and whatever.
I'll do that.
Good. Well, I've got a sign-up sheet, so you can sign up. But the other thing I think that we should do, and I'm going a little long, the other thing I think that we should do is, those are the easy people to visit for us. The hard people to visit are the conservative Christians, right? People within our own tradition. Some of our families are mixed, right? We have some conservatives in our families like, oh my God, don't bring up religion! But those are the barriers we should bring up, and we should be talking to our brothers and sisters across the board. So I want a group to go there too. So I'm going to pass this around. There are multiple pages, and I just want 3 to 5 people once a month going to these places. If you want to do it, fine. But this is a congregational church. I'm not a priest ordering you to do this. I'm a minister saying this is what we should do to make our church stronger and to make the world a little safer. So I'll pass this around. If you want to sign up, you can. Don't have to. Any questions?